This action-packed movie revolves around a desperate DEA agent, a risky plan, and one guy's shot at freedom. So what's the deal? A prisoner is asked to step into the shoes of a notorious drug kingpin. Why would anyone agree to that kind of crazy gig? Stick around, and we'll break it all down. The story kicks off near the coast of California, where an old man spins a tale about Bobby Z, a legendary marijuana smuggler. This guy was the top dog in his field, raking in cash and making a name for himself. Then, we're yanked out of this coastal setting and thrown into the gritty confines of a prison. Here, we meet Tim Kearney, a former Marine with a pretty ugly rap sheet. He's serving time for all kinds of violent crimes and isn't exactly popular with the other inmates. One guy in particular, a gangster known as Mad Dog, seems to have it out for him. Mad Dog has plenty of loyal goons both inside and outside the prison walls. So Tim's life is basically a never-ending nightmare. But Tim's a tough guy, and after enduring one beating too many, he snaps. In a bold and brutal move, he takes Mad Dog out using a license plate. Yeah, not exactly subtle. This move sets off a chain reaction. Tim's now a marked man, and Mad Dog's crew won't let it slide. Enter Tad Gruzza, a federal agent with an unusual offer. Gruzza tells Tim he's as good as dead in prison now. But there's a way out. Impersonate Bobby Z, a drug lord who's recently died. All Tim has to do is stand in for the real Bobby Z during a dangerous exchange. Tim's cocky at first and claims he can handle Maddox's crew, but let's be real, he's no fool. Gruzza's offer is his ticket to survival, so he takes the deal. Cut to the open ocean. A federal agent named Moreno is being held hostage by Don Huertero, a powerful crime boss. The deal? Huertero wants Bobby Z in exchange for Moreno's freedom. Problem is, the actual Bobby Z is dead. So Gruzza's plan is to pass off Tim as the infamous drug lord and make the swap. Tim gets a makeover to look like Bobby Z. He's also shown photos of two women, Olivia and Elizabeth, who were close to Bobby Z. Once he's prepped, Tim heads to the US-Mexico border for the exchange. He's also given contact info for a guy named Monk, Bobby's business partner. But surprise, Gruzza's not exactly playing fair. The plan isn't just to save Moreno. He also wants Tim dead. When the exchange goes sideways and Gruzza's shot misses, chaos erupts. Gunfire breaks out between Gruzza's team and Don Huertero's men. Tim takes advantage of the mayhem and slips into the bushes, trying to stay out of sight. Unfortunately, his cover's blown when one of Huertero's men finds him. Tim's dragged away at gunpoint. The next thing he knows, he's in a lavish mansion, treated like an honored guest. A maid shows up with a slick new suit and lets him know there's a pool party happening. At the party, Tim spots Elizabeth chilling with a kid named Kit. Things seem calm, but then a waiter comes over and says Brian wants a word. Brian, one of Huertero's top guys, explains that the boss is busy handling other business and hasn't shown up yet. Later that night, Elizabeth visits Tim's room. Curious, Tim asks about the boy she was with. Turns out, Kit is Bobby Z's son, a secret only Elizabeth and Olivia know. The two share a close moment, and Elizabeth drops a bombshell. Huertero plans to kill Bobby Z, aka Tim, after the deal is done. But she doesn't spill why Huertero wants him dead. Knowing his time is running out, Tim decides to get out of there before Huertero shows up. But just as he's about to make his escape, Kit catches him. The boy, who's been mistreated by Brian and Huertero, begs Tim to take him along. Tim agrees, and the two make a break for it on horseback. Of course, Brian figures out they're gone and sends his men to chase them down. As they're fleeing, Tim hides Kit in some bushes while he fights off their pursuers. Using his marine skills, Tim takes down a bunch of Brian's guys, snags a motorbike, and scoops Kit back up. They're in the clear for a while, but the bike eventually runs out of gas. Now they're stuck on foot, trudging through the wilderness. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Brian realizes Elizabeth helped Tim escape. Huertero isn't pleased and punishes Elizabeth for the betrayal. Brian sends his goon, Johnson, to track Tim down. Johnson goes all out, even tossing grenades from a plane. Tim and Kit scramble for cover among some rocks. Despite being outnumbered, Tim manages to take out Johnson's men. But just when he thinks they're safe, Johnson shoots him in the leg. Back at Herodo's place, things aren't looking good for Brian. Herodo's furious that Bobby Z slipped through his fingers and decides to make Brian pay for his failures. Brian tries to weasel out of trouble by blaming Bobby Z's escape on Elizabeth. He claims she let their plan slip. Turns out, Elizabeth had a deeper connection to all of this. She was best friends with Olivia, Don Herodo's daughter, who tragically took her own life. Instead of explaining her reasons, Elizabeth just shows the brutal scars from Brian's whip. Don Herodo doesn't need more convincing. He orders Johnson to capture Bobby Z alive. That same night, Don Herodo's anger isn't spent yet. He decides Brian deserves more punishment for hurting Elizabeth. By the next day, Brian's battered body is dumped near the border, where Gruzza finds it. Realizing Tim slipped away to Mexico, Gruzza calls Boom Boom, one of Maddox's loyal thugs. He wants Boom Boom to rally the crew and hunt Tim down to pay for Maddox's death. Meanwhile, Tim and Kit have holed up at a small inn to lay low. Tim buys an old, beat-up car from the innkeeper and takes Kit to stock up on food and supplies. While playing the part of Bobby Z, he calls Monk and tells him to get cash and passports ready. Monk tells Tim to swing by his place the next day. Unbeknownst to Tim, Johnson is hot on their trail. He arrives at the inn, grills the owner, and sneaks into Tim's room through the window. But Tim's no fool. He's rigged the room with a nasty trap. To make things worse, Boom Boom is also lurking around, ready to strike. When Tim and Kit return from their supply run, Tim's gut tells him something's off. He stops Kit just before he opens the booby trap door. The trap goes off, taking Johnson out in a fiery explosion. But there's no time to celebrate because Boom Boom opens fire on them right after. Tim fights back, knocking Boom Boom down and stealing his motorbike. They speed away just in time. Over at Monk's place, Elizabeth is already there, waiting. Monk mentions that Bobby Z, Tim, in disguise, called and that he's planning a big welcome home bash. The next day, Tim shows up at Monk's house and runs into Elizabeth. She admits she's known he isn't the real Bobby Z from the very beginning. Outside, Gruzza and Boom Boom are lurking, ready to pounce. Inside, Tim comes clean to Elizabeth about who he really is. When he's about to meet Monk, Elizabeth warns him. She says Monk knows he's not Bobby Z, but she convinced Monk to help him out. Monk's waiting at the port with cash and fake passports so Tim can escape. They rush to grab Kit and flee, but Don Herodo beats them to it. He's holding Kit hostage. Finally, Don Herodo spills the beans. He wants Bobby Z dead because Bobby and Monk tricked him, costing him a fortune. And to top it off, Bobby broke Olivia's heart, driving her to take her own life. Don Herodo threatens to kill both Kit and Elizabeth. But Tim's not having it. He promises to take them all down if Kit gets hurt. Just then, Kit uses the self-defense moves Tim taught him, creating a distraction. This gives Tim and Elizabeth a chance to break free and take out Herodo and his goons. At the same time, Gruzza visits the real Bobby Z's hideout. Surprise! Bobby Z is actually alive. Turns out, Gruzza and Bobby fake Bobby's death, planning to use Tim as a decoy. The idea was for Don Herodo to see Bobby die and finally let it go. But the plan flopped because Tim survived. Back at the port, Tim, Kit, and Elizabeth finally make it. Monk hands over the cash and passports. Thinking they're in the clear, Tim tosses his gun into the sea. But fate isn't done messing with them. Boom Boom and Maddox's biker gang show up, guns blazing. Tim bolts, ending up on a bridge. He's trapped with Boom Boom and the gang closing in. Just when things look hopeless, Gruzza rolls up with the real Bobby Z. Tim gets a wild idea and flips the script. He claims he's the real Bobby Z and says the guy with Gruzza is actually Tim Kearney. The gang is confused and a heated argument breaks out. Guns are pointed and tension rises. Then Kit shouts, calling Tim Dad, which seals the deal. Boom Boom and the gang believe Tim's the real Bobby Z and unload their guns on the real Bobby and Gruzza. With the danger finally over, Tim grabs Kit and hops on a boat with Elizabeth. They sail off into the sunset, ready to start fresh. And just like that, the crazy ride of the death and life of Bobby Z comes to an end.